Hello everyone, I'm Douglas Burberry and I'm a Scholar of History in Tasmania. And today I'd like to talk about the jail at Ross. Now, is it actually a jail? Or is it in fact something else? Let's find out. The photograph shown here is of the building, which is situated on one of the four corners of Ross, the crossroads where the main street of Ross, called Church Street, intersects with the road coming from the Ross Bridge, known as Bridge Street. This building is now a private residence, but it was originally built in 1929 as the residence for the Ross Council Clerk, and it is still often referred to today as the Council Clerk's residence. It is not the original building which first appeared in this location. It replaces an earlier building which is usually referred to nowadays as having been the local jail. This is the building which stood on the site before the Council Clerk's residence was built. The corner where it stood is known as the Damnation corner because of this building, which is nowadays referred to as the jail. By about 1915, this building had collapsed into almost total dereliction, and it ended up being completely demolished to make way for the new Council Clerk's residence. Some remnants of the old building do still exist. For instance, the remains of the old holding cells can still be seen in the backyard of the house. And the stone wall on the Church Street side might be a relic of the original wall. Almost all of the commentaries that you read about this older building call it a jail, but I'm not sure that that's what it actually was. Maybe for the last couple of years of its existence it was a jail, but for all of its life before that, it's incorrect to call it a jail because that's not what it was. It was not a jail, it was a watch house. So I can hear some sighs of exasperation from people saying, well, jail, watch house, what's the difference? They were the same thing, weren't they? They both held prisoners. Well, no, actually, a jail and a watch house were not the same thing. They had similar functions, but to call them the same thing is to gloss over an important and, I think, interesting part of our history. The basic difference between a jail and a watch house was this. Firstly, a watch house was part of the police department. It was presided over by constables who answered to the local chief district constable, who answered to the police magistrate, who answered to the chief police magistrate, part of the police department. Watch houses were generally used to house prisoners for short periods of time, like before they were to be transferred to a jail, or for people with short-term sentences such as overnight stays in solitary confinement on bread and water, or people who had been arrested for drunkenness. Jails, on the other hand, were not part of the police department. They were part of the sheriff's department, a completely different department altogether. They were used much as they are used now to house prisoners with long-term sentences or prisoners who were on remand while waiting for their trials. The head of the sheriff's department was the sheriff, and he was in charge of the jailers who had charge of the jails. Jailers were helped out in their job by javelin men, whose job it was to escort prisoners to and from the jail, for instance, when they were going to church or had to appear in front of a magistrate at the courthouse. The earliest known references to a building on this site are from about 1832, and from then right through until about the 1880s, the building on the site was consistently referred to as a watch house, and it was described as the place where the constables hung out. This is an early chart of the Ross Township, showing the area around the four corners and the old and new bridges. You can see the watch house marked on the corner here, and it can be clearly seen that it is referred to as a watch house, not as a jail. This is the case for all the references we find to this building from then on. This newspaper article refers to the jail at Ross, but it also says that the police department is responsible for it. Maybe this was just an informal usage, or maybe by that time the terminology in use had changed, but in any case, the building at this time is said to be extremely dilapidated, and it wasn't long after this that it was demolished. Note that there was a jail in the district, a proper jail, run by the Sheriff's Department and administered by a jailer. This jail was in Campbelltown, the township 12 kilometres to the north of Ross. The jail at Campbelltown was often in a very dilapidated state, and there was a heap of correspondence between the jailer, the sheriff, and other government officials regarding the dilapidated state of the jail and how it needed to be repaired or either totally rebuilt. And the jail at Campbelltown also features in a number of incidents, you could almost call them, conflicts, actually, between the jailer on one hand and often the Chief District Constable on the other hand. Or in other words, between the Sheriff's Department and the Police Department. And this is why I think it's important and not trivial at all to draw a distinction between these two departments, the Sheriff's Department and the Police Department, particularly in the way that they operated in early Van Diemen's Land. And also it's, I think, not trivial, but it is important to get the terminology right, to ensure that you are in fact talking about a watch house and not a jail. And I think it's fairly clear from the contemporary evidence that this former building at Ross was not a jail, but was actually a watch house.